have to admit that there is an element of that. So it gives me space, and it's not a doctrine as such, but it's an instrument to take us over this period of transition. I know Mark Carney talked about rupture, and he might be right. He's a bit.
You've converted Mark Carney, but how do you get beyond Canada?
It's kind of the biggest achievement in my life. I mean, Mark Carney quoting values-based realism, but no, I mean it's kind of the idea is. Then you have to ask yourself the question, okay, how do you do this? Well, a good starting point in my mind is another instrument I try to outline there, which is dignified foreign policy, because I feel that, we have a lot of conversation about history, about a post-colonial world, about colonialism, and we always look back into history for examples on how we have been treated. So my take, and of course I come from a rather inoffensive country, with a limited colonial past, which means that it gives me kind of street cred to do that. So I talk about dignified foreign policy. In other words, you have to behave towards the people that you want to work with in a respectable way, which seems to be lacking a little bit in the world right now as well, I have to admit.
So we've been through this extraordinary psychodrama over the last couple of weeks around Greenland. I think without a doubt, in my mind, it's the biggest transatlantic crisis that we've seen since at least Suez. It looks like things are kind of being resolved, but I think it is quite important to take some lessons from what's happened over the last period of time. What do you think the main lessons are?
That we live in an unpredictable world, and there will be curveballs coming at you in foreign policy virtually every day. I don't remember a Davos, and I've been here 11 times, where in the first 21 days of the year we've had Venezuela, we've had Ukraine, we've had Greenland, we've had Iran, we've had Gaza, just to name 5 conflicts that have been tossed around. We just have to take these curveballs one at a time. In the Greenland issue, right in the beginning when it started, you had 2 camps. You had those in Europe who wanted to de-escalate, and then those who wanted to escalate to de-escalate. And I think most of us sort of worked in both of these spheres, so we were looking for instruments which would try to tone down the language by threatening escalation on different types of measures that the European Union has. But the key for me was to look at 3 possible outcomes or scenarios. One was good, one was bad, and one was ugly. The good one was that we would get an off-ramp and then a process which would strengthen Arctic security. A bad one would be an escalation in tariff wars. And an ugly one would be a declaration of military intervention in Greenland. And I think in the past 3 to 4 days, where we pretty much worked around the clock with Mark Rutte and Jonas Störe and American senators and others, we were able to escalate to de-escalate and end up in zone number 1. So good outcome. But at the same time, I can't say that this won't have an effect. Of course it does, because one of the key principles of the international order and how you treat alliances is that you respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of each and every one of us. But we were able to deal with it short term, and now we have to look what we come up with long term.
So what do you think the short-term lesson is that you need a mix of showing that you're serious by filling the vacuum, both militarily with threatening to use countermeasures
and frenetic diplomacy. It's just you just have to work the phone, and you have to do it behind the scenes.
And in terms of the longer-term questions, I mean, you're a very passionate European. You've worked for the EU institutions as well as for your own government. You've been part of this fundamental transformation of Finnish identity from being a kind of neutral country to being one of the most passionate defenders of European sovereignty and of the EU. What do you think Europeans need to do now in order to make sure they can be sovereign in this new world that we've been talking about?
The first just general observation is people don't realize this. Finland is actually the only Nordic country which is 100% EU member. in the sense that we are in the
no
euro.
opt-outs.
Exactly. We don't, we're in the euro and we don't have any derogations. And I think that the original decision for us to join the union in 1995 in a referendum was based on security, though we didn't want to talk about it at the time. We never wanted to be alone again, so we did that. And of course on NATO, which I wish we would have joined much earlier, we ended up joining it also because, attacked Ukraine. So what's my advice to my European friends? That is to say that don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We've been in transatlantic crisis before. You mentioned the Suez Canal. France left NATO. There has actually been regime change or elections have changed leaders in Germany because of placement of different types of military equipment in Germany because of the transatlantic relationship. So I think be pragmatic, use the values-based, be true to your own values. So that means that you look for places where you can cooperate with the United States and the current administration. The war in Ukraine is an obvious one. NATO is another one. In my case, icebreakers. Probably not in the case of the rest of you, but we work with the American administration on technology. We work with minerals. But at the same time, we can't do it naively. We have to be cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of movement in the transatlantic partnership right now. But fortunately, Finland's bilateral relations with the U.S. is really good, so we are in a good place. But when you do that, realize that there are going to be areas where you're simply going to disagree. And you can tell that either publicly, which some people do, or then privately, which I do. So it could be issues linked to international institutions and American withdrawal from the multilateral system, or it could be on U.S. unilateral action. It could be on climate change. It could be on how we defend democracy, both at home and abroad. It certainly was on Greenland, where you don't have to be an expert of international relations to understand why Finland staunchly supports Denmark and Greenland. So you just have to be open in this relationship. And when you do that, I think there's three levels. One is, of course, for me, the direct contact with the president. But I don't have no illusions. I mean, Trump whisperer, nice, but I mean, I whisper or text, and most of the time he doesn't listen. So, so be realistic about it. Second level is people close to Trump. And the third level is actually the first branch of government, Senate and Congress in general. So you just have to work very pragmatically at it and believe that this transatlantic partnership will survive.
So before we all became experts on Greenland and Greenlandic security, the biggest European security question was about Ukraine and its future, and that is something which is very much still on the cards. And we hear that Steve Witkoff is going to fly off from Davos to Moscow.
And Jared Kushner.
And Jared Kushner as well. You've been intimately involved in every single stage of the negotiations and discussions around Ukrainian security. How do you see the situation at the moment?
Well, I think probably two remarks on that. One on the peace process and one on the narrative of the war. So on the peace process, I'm carefully optimistic in the sense that ever since, to be honest, Jared Kushner came in, the process became much more concrete. So yes, there was the 28-point plan. But if you look at what happened after G20 in three different cities, Geneva, Berlin and Paris. In Geneva, we had national security advisors from the US, from Ukraine, and from Europe, trying to suss out and bring it down to 20 points. Then in Berlin, we had a number of European leaders, and then Kushner and Witkoff, who came to look at common landing zones. And then in Berlin, on the 5th of December, we had a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. And in a broad perspective, I think we're almost there. So we have pretty much 5+2 documents, which have to do with the 20-point plan, security guarantees, the prosperity plan, a sequencing plan, and a few others. So the good news is that Europe, Ukraine, and the United States is on the same page here. Now, my second point is that there seems to be a narrative that Ukraine is losing this war, and I simply don't buy that. And we have enough information and intelligence to back this up as well. But it's a Russian narrative which has been also floated a lot in the US. The first question you have to ask yourself, what were the strategic aims of Putin? Number one was to take over Ukraine and make it Russian. Well, Ukraine is going to become a member of the European Union. Number two was to prevent NATO enlargement. Well, Finland and Sweden joined because of Russia's war of aggression, and that basically doubles the border of NATO with Russia, so another failure. The third aim was to avoid the remilitarization of Europe. Now we're spending up to 5% of our GDP on defense expenditure. So and on top of that, you look at Russian projection of power in Iran, loss. Syria, loss. Venezuela, loss. What the United States was able to do in Venezuela in 12 hours in an operation is what the Russian military wanted to do in Ukraine, with total failure. So, don't buy into this narrative that Russia is somehow winning this war. And if you look at it from a military perspective, what is going on right now is remarkable. Not only is Ukraine holding